Hello everyone, welcome back to our week 2 of our emotional literacy workshop. I'm so happy to see you guys all again. So last week we focused on understanding emotions, right? Like where they come from, how they work, and how to build awareness around them. And today we're going to take a step deeper. We're going to talk about something every single one of us deals with every day, which is relationships and communication. This workshop is designed to help you understand not just how you feel, but how to express those feelings clearly, right? How to navigate your misunderstandings, how to communicate in a way that builds connection. So, before we start, let me just briefly introduce myself and HerPower. So, my name's Camille, and I'm the founder of HerPower. We are a youth-led nonprofit that focuses on emotional literacy, mental well-being, and women's empowerment. Our mission is to help young people, especially girls, to build both inner strength and outer confidence because emotional awareness is really the foundation of all growth. And today, I'm really happy that we're running this workshop with SheBuildsTheFuture, which is an amazing organization that empowers girls to explore leadership and STEM fields with confidence. And since this is a joint workshop, I'd like to invite SheBuildsTheFuture to quickly introduce themselves and share a bit about what they do.
Hi everyone, my name is Ishan, and give me 1 second.
Yeah, no worries.
Wait, can you all hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So this is SheBuildsTheFuture, and super happy to see you all today again. Our organization is dedicated to empowering young women in STEM by creating opportunities, resources, and supportive spaces. And so today's event is a special collaboration with our Department of Psychology and HerPower. So I hope you all have fun today, and I hope today's lesson inspire you to think deeper and continue to build the future with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm really excited for us to be working together. I think, what both of our nonprofit really connects well, right? Both empowerment through both education and growth. So before we jump into today's content, let me just do a quick recap of last week's key idea. So last time we introduced the foundation of emotional literacy, right? Understanding your internal world before responding to the external one. We talked about emotional awareness, naming emotion, noticing the patterns, and recognizing how emotion influence your thoughts and action. Today's session builds directly on those skills because once you understand your emotions, the next question is, how do I communicate them in a healthy way? And how do I build relationships that support my well-being instead of draining it? That's the focus of today. So, as we talked about last week, right, emotional literacy means being able to recognize, understand, and express your emotions in yourself, not just being emotional, it's about being skilled with your emotions. The more emotionally literate you are, the more clearly and calmly you can explain what's happening inside of you, right? Instead of bottling up or reacting to them too strongly. And honestly, this is one of the most important life skills you can ever learn because it affects your friendship, your family relationships, and your communication style, even your self confidence. When you learn emotional literacy, right, you gain the tools that help you protect your inner world. You build emotional resilience, meaning that you can bounce back faster from difficulties, and you're able to communicate with clarity and kindness instead of confusion or frustration. And most importantly, you start feel seen, heard, and understood, not just by others, but by yourself. So last week, we also introduced this simple but three-step process to be emotionally literate, which is first, we have to identify the emotion. And then second, we have to reason through the situation, right? We have to think about what's happening, what triggered it, and what need is underneath. And then third, we have express, right? Which is communicating clearly, calmly, and with intention. This is especially important in relationships because misunderstanding happens so easily when emotions are unclear. And today I'll show you how these 3 steps help prevent conflict and strengthen connection. Now, one of the most important concepts from last week was the Plutchik's wheel of emotions. So remember how we said being emotionally literate always start with recognizing how you feel? Well, Plutchik's wheel helped us do exactly that. And it was named by a psychologist called Robert Plutchik, who discovered that both animals and humans share the 8 basic emotions, which are joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, anger, and anticipation. His research showed that emotions aren't just random or dramatic, right? They're actually signals that help us survive and understand what matters to us. And each feeling also had a opposite, right? Like trust versus disgust, fear versus anger, and depending on how strong the feeling is, it can intensify or blend into more complex emotions. So, for example, if you're feeling both sadness and anger, then that can feel like disappointment, or it can be joy and trust, which feels like love. But the key takeaway is that emotions are messages and they are not problems. They are trying to tell you something really important. And when you can name your emotions, you can start to understand it. And once you understand it, you can communicate it, which is exactly what we're focusing on today. So you can think of Plutchik's wheel kind of like a map, right? It helps you identify where you are emotionally. So instead of reacting automatically, you can choose a healthier response. We also touched on the PERMA model last time, which stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationship, meaning, and accomplishment. And today, the R, which is the relationship, is our focus. Positive relationships are one of the strongest um, predictors of happiness and long-term well-being. But healthy relationships don't happen by accident. They require awareness, communication, boundaries, and skills. All things we're going to build on today. And I also want you to remember the plus of the PERMA model, which is things like optimism, physical activity, nutrition, and sleep. These influence your emotional capacity, meaning that when you feel tired or stressed, communication becomes harder. So, learning to take care of yourself first before anything. So, now that we've freshened the foundation of last week's class, let's move fully into today's topic, which is relationship and communication. So today is going to be a very practical session. We're going to look at real examples, analyze communication patterns, and introduce a new 4-step framework that you can apply anywhere, and talk a bit about the common communication blockers. So again, everything we've learned from last week becomes meaningful only when you can apply it into real interactions. And today's workshop is all about real life practice, how to read your emotion in the moment, how to pause before reacting, how to express yourself without conflict, and how to handle misunderstandings with clarity instead of frustration. So by the end of today's session, you'll have the tools you can use with your friends, siblings, parents, teachers, teammates, and every relationships in your life. So let's look at a short clip called A Failure to Communicate. And as you watch it, I want you to pay attention to what barriers appear between the 2 main characters, right? And what assumptions are being made between them.
Excuse me? Hello? Hey! I'm a human being. If you don't want to help, at least say so.
Hello, I am deaf. I may have trouble comprehending you. Thank you for your consideration. Usually, I'd read your lips to understand you.
Oh.
If you like, you could let this convert your speech to text for me.
Okay. Could you tell me how to gesture?
Want to try again?
Attention passengers, all is well. Thank you.
Low power shutting down.
Oh, yay!
Attention passengers, line 4 is delayed for 1 hour. Thank you.
Okay, so that's it for the video. So, this short film might seem simple, right? Just two strangers at a train station, but it reflects something that we experience once in a while. We think we're communicating, but so often we're not truly being understood, or we forget to step into the other person's shoes. In the video, the woman in the hijab just wanted directions, right? But the other woman who can't hear wasn't ignoring her, and she wasn't responding because she simply just couldn't hear. But what happens first? You saw it like there were a bit of violence, there were frustration, confusion, and judgment. That instant emotional reaction we all have when someone doesn't respond the way we expected. At that moment, both women felt misunderstood, right? And that's exactly how conflict begins. Not because people are being rude or unkind, but because our message get lost somewhere between intention and perception. But then, the moment the woman realized the other can't hear her, everything shifts because you can feel like the tension melting away and compassion replaces frustration. They stop reacting and they start connecting. They change how they communicate, right? By using gestures, writing, eye contact, body language. And suddenly, understanding appears where conflict once was. And that's the power of true communication. It's never about who's speaking louder. It's about finding the right approach and the right mindset. In any conflict, the moment we stop trying to win the conflict and start to try understanding the other person, we move from resistant to relationships. So this video isn't just about a deaf woman and a woman in hijab, right? It's about all of us during communication. It reminds us that empathy, curiosity, and adaptability can turn misunderstanding into connection. And every time we pause and truly listen, we open the door for real understanding to begin. That's why before we even trying to solve a conflict, we have to start from the outside. From the inside with our emotions, right? Because when we're upset, even the right words can come out wrong. So here is a simple four-step framework that's very similar to the three-step framework, which help us to communicate more effectively, especially when things feels intense. So first, as usual, you pause and you try to notice your feeling, right? Before you respond, just pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now, right? Am I feeling angry, hurt, frustrated, or anxious? Or is there something underneath, like fear or disappointment? You can use the Plutchik's wheel that we learned from last week to pinpoint what you're actually feeling. Naming your emotion helps you separate yourself from it, right? It turns that I'm being angry into, okay, I feel angry. And that small shift already gives you perspective and control. And then the second one, we have regulate and return to neutral, right? Once you know when you're feeling, take a breath. Maybe step away for a minute, right? Get some fresh air or drink some water. You simply cannot have a productive conversation when your emotions are storming inside. So returning neutral is really important. And it doesn't mean to push your feelings away. It means giving yourself enough space to respond with calm and clarity instead of reacting out of frustration. And third is seek to understand, not to win. When you feel centered again, right, shift your focus outward. Ask yourself, what might be, what might the other person be trying to say, right? What might they be feeling right now? Most conflict aren't really about who's right or wrong. They're about two people who want to feel heard. And approaching someone with curiosity instead of judgment create room for understanding instead of tension. And then the fourth one, we have express and find a solution. When you're ready, right, express your thoughts calmly. You can use I statements like, I feel hurt when, or I am disappointed because. So by using the I statement, you're sharing your experience without blaming. And then you move towards solution, right? You can ask, what is my responsibility or their responsibility, or is it something that we both need to work together? When you identify that, it becomes much easier to find a path forward that respects both sides and rebuilds trust, because communication isn't just about expressing, it's about resolving. So remember the four steps: pause, regulate, understand, express, and resolve. When we manage our emotions first, our words become bridge, not just weapons. That's how we turn conflict into connection, and that's where real communication begins. So now that we've learned how to use the Plutchik's wheel and identify our emotions, as well as how to regulate ourselves before reacting, we can move on to the next part of the framework, which is step 3 and step 4. It is learning how to communicate effectively. And I want to start with a simple question. So, when you're in a conflict, do you tend to explode and say things that you don't really mean, or you withdraw and you shut down and go silent? This is one of the most common patterns we see, right? People react to a situation using some form of communication blocking behavior. And this usually happens because something triggered us, something that we called a stimulus. So that leads to the two most important definition we need to understand, which is a communication blocker. What a communication blocker is exactly what it sounds like, right? Something that blocks communication. But it's more than just blocking. It's anything that prevents communication from being clear, calm, or effective as well. It is what happens when your emotional reaction takes over your ability to listen, think, or respond thoughtfully. For example, like shutting down, right, interrupting, or getting defensive. All those are communication blockers. And a stimulus, on the other hand, is anything that triggers a reaction in you. It could be a tone of voice, the way someone looks at you, a certain word, or a memory. Anything that causes a physical or emotional shift. So in simple terms, stimulus isn't just emotional reaction, it leads to so in simple terms, stimulus leads to emotional reaction, and that leads to communication blocker. So now let's talk about effective communication. When we heard this phrase, right, most of us don't actually know what it really means, and it becomes even harder when we're even in conflict. One of the hardest part of any relationship is knowing how to respond when we feel threatened, activated, or overwhelmed. Some people try to avoid the conflict entirely, while others accidentally make it worse because they don't know how to express what they're feeling. That's why we understand. That's why understanding yourself, right, like how you personally react under strength, is the first and most important step, right? You have to understand and know yourself before moving on to anything. And it's the same reason that in our last workshop, we focused on emotional awareness before we talked about helping or understand anyone else. And here's the difference between true and effective communication. True communication happens when both people feel safe enough to be honest and open enough to listen. It's not just being it's not just about words. It's about emotional environment that makes those words possible. So effective communication means that your message are actually landing in a way that you intended, like what you meant to say to the other truly hears without distortion, assumption, or emotional overwhelm. And to communicate both truthfully and effectively, we need four key qualities, which is self-awareness, right? Like knowing your emotions so you know how to respond from reflection, not just reaction. And then we have empathy, which is understanding what the other person might be feeling. And then we have clarity, which is expressing yourself calmly and clearly. And lastly, we have respect, which is listening as much as you speak. When these come together, communication stops about being right versus wrong. It becomes a bridge, right? A way to understand others, resolve conflict, and actually grow. And that's what true communication is about. So now we're going to break down the top 4 communication blocker, the habit that make conflict harder and instead of easier. And more importantly, I'll show you what you can do instead of shutting down, withdrawing from anger, or reacting in ways that lead to an ineffective communication. I'm also to give you some script and sentence starter that you can actually use in real life. That way, the next time you're in a conflict, you'll have the tools to solve the problem, rather than ending the conversation in a hurtful way that you might regret later on. So, the first communication blocker we're going to talk about is the inability to express your needs. So, for many people, when they're in the heat of the moment, they want to explain what they feel, but their mind suddenly goes blank, right? You feel frozen, speechless, or overwhelmed. And this is actually a normal response, right? Depending on your background, conflict can feel threatening, and it can activate your flight or freeze response. So if you ever feel like I can't talk during a conflict, that's not a personality flaw. It's your nervous system trying to protect you. But here's the problem. When you can't express what you need, the other person has no way to know what's wrong. And unmet needs easily turn into anger, frustration, or hurt. So we want to gain clarity before we get into heated conversations. And you can try asking yourself, what is the unmet need underneath my reaction, right? What exactly am I feeling right now? And what do I wish the other person to understand? One of the best tools you can use is something simple, right? You get a paper, you write it down, and you write everything down. You write your feelings, your thoughts, and your needs. Um, it might feel a bit awkward at first, but it is incredibly effective because once you write it down, you become clear on what upsets you and why it upsets you and what you actually need moving forward. And here's the important part. Nobody can read your mind. People don't automatically know how you feel or why something affected you. Writing it down gives you the clarity to communicate those things. You can even write down the problem or situation between you guys and share with the other person, right? What you're doing here is inviting the other person into your process. You're not allowing them to be part of you're allowing them to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And yes, it might feel a little strange at first, but I once recommended this to a friend, and she told me that it completely changed the way that she communicated. Because once you can express yourself true, one once you can express your truth clearly, half the emotion pressure starts to disappear. And remember, expressing your needs is a win, no matter how the other person reacts. Your job is to identify your feelings and understand your unmet needs and share them honestly. And their job is choosing how they want to respond. But the moment you speak your truth with clarity and compassion, you build respect and you start trusting yourself. You start to prove that your voice matters, not just to others, but to you. And that's where real healing begins. And then the second major communication blocker is listening to respond instead of listening to understand. So you've probably experienced something like this, like the other person is talking, but you're not really listening. You're just waiting for your chance to jump in and make your point or prove that you're right. It's a feeling of wanting to win the argument, even if it means the conversation goes nowhere. This is something that we do all the time, but it is important to look at it honestly because when we're focused on poking holes in the other person's logic or proving that they got it wrong, we're not creating space for connection. We're creating a debate. And what usually happens in a debate, right? A debate usually ends with a winner and a loser, not two people who understand each other. So, what can we do instead? We can learn to listen with the intention to understand, not to just gather the evidence that supports our side. And that shift alone changes everything. One healthy practice in relationship is to create regular check-ins. This could be weekly or twice a month, where you guys can sit down and talk about like what's been going on, what needs improvement, and how have you guys been feeling. When you normalize communication outside of conflict, you're less likely to reach that emotional stalemate where both of you guys feel unheard. Because here's the truth, you cannot resolve a conflict when you're trying to win at the same time. You cannot be loving and competitive in that moment. Those two intentions don't go together. So instead of trying to win, try asking, open-minded questions like, is there any more that you want to say about that? Or how did that make you feel? What do you think about in this situation? Or I want to understand your perspective. Can you tell me more? These questions open the conversation instead of closing them, just like any skills. This takes practice. You're not you're moving from debating, right, where there's a winner and a loser to discussing, where the goal is mutual understanding. And yes, ideally this happens on both sides, but right now we're focusing on what you can control. It's easy to blame the other person and say that, oh, they're the one that wants to win, right? They're the one that's like debating. And maybe that's true, but you can only take responsibility for your side of the street. Your side is the only part you can keep clean, the only part you have control over. So improving your communication already shifts the entire dynamic. And then the third major communication blocker is silent treatment, also known as stonewalling. It's like shutting down, becoming unresponsive, or withdrawing completely from a conflict. Now, if you're someone who does this, it may not feel like anger to you, right? You might feel overwhelmed, frozen, or just unable to talk. But to the other person, it can come across as punishment, right? As something that you're erasing them from the conversation. It's like a passive aggressive form of anger, even if that's not your intention. So, what can you do instead? You have to choose to use your word, even if it's uncomfortable. Naming your feelings is the first step out of silent treatment pattern. You maybe can tell the person that you're in a conflict and that you need to go somewhere and you'll be back. This way, you can try to cooling yourself down before starting to find a solution. And just like that, you get your actual needs met, right? The needs that you want to use silent treatment, right? Whether it's a 10-minute of space, 20 minutes, or a short walk outside. This is important because once you fall into the withdrawal and anger pattern, it becomes incredibly hard to climb out. When you know that it's not helping, the silence start to feel like a trap. But telling them that you are going to step away for a moment is like giving yourself a ladder. It replaces silent withdrawal with clear communication. And by the time you get back, you're calmer, you're less triggered, and you're able to solve the problem instead of blame. Because silent builds walls, but words build bridges. And the four major communication blocker, and probably like the most common one, is defensiveness and blame. I say this one for the last because almost everyone struggles with this at some point. So, why do we get defensive during conflict? Because we feel threatened. We're trying to justify our behavior, protect ourselves from feeling wrong, or shift the blame into the other person. And defensiveness often comes from unresolved shame, or from feeling judged, criticized, or misunderstood in relationships. For many people, this sensitivity traces back to childhood. If you grew up with a very critical adult in your life, even the smallest hint of criticism can feel like a direct attack. Your nervous system responds as if that you're still that child that's being blamed, and suddenly you're in the defend or defended zone. That's why this part of the communication requires self-work. If you notice a pattern of becoming defensive during a conflict, you have to understand your own reactions. Blaming or shaming the other person to win doesn't actually win anything. It damages the trust and safety in your relationships. So here are some practical things that you can do to reduce blame and defensiveness. So first, you have to stick to one issue at a time. Don't bring up like five past arguments from like in the last year or something that happens in like 2025. When you pile up on old issues, you guarantee that none of them will be resolved. They'll only create more resentment and confusion. And second, choose being loving over being right. This doesn't mean ignoring your needs or tolerating mistreatment. It simply means asking yourself, is my goal right now to connect or conquer? Because you can't do both at the same time. And then third, we have using the I statement instead of blame. Instead of, oh, like you never listen, you always ruin everything, you're so sensitive, right? You this, you that. Try using I, right? Like, I feel hurt when that happened. I need more clarity when we talk about this. Or I want us to understand each other better. Using I statement reduce defensiveness and create understanding. And fourth is take a break before reacting. If you feel yourself getting heated, step back and breathe, right? Ask yourself, what is my 50% of the situation? Because in every relationship, you're 50% of the dynamic, and that's the part you can control. And then fifth, we have build the skills of healthy assertion. You absolutely can learn to express yourself clearly and respectively, and even in conflict. And here are some simple sentence starters you can use anytime. For example, right, it's like using the I statement, right? I'd like to make a simple request, blah, blah, blah. I want to bring something to your attention, blah, blah, blah. I'd like to revisit what happened yesterday, blah, blah, blah. These are gentle ways to open a conversation without blame, without shame, and without triggering defensiveness. Because the truth is this, no one wants to feel, no one wants to be in the room of being misunderstood. And that's exactly where defensiveness keeps us. When we can't communicate clearly, the conflict never resolves. It just goes underground. But when you learn these skills and use them consistently, you build relationships where both people feel seen, respected, and understood. And that's the foundation of every healthy connection. So now that we've learned the four major communication blockers, let's just bring everything together. So, whenever you're in a conflict, the first thing you should do is return to the four-step framework we introduced earlier, because before you can communicate with anyone else, you need to get yourself grounded. The first step is always understand your emotions. Don't explode, shut down, or react automatically. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now, right? Why am I feeling this way? And what do I actually need? And I know it might actually feel a bit awkward at first, but I strongly recommend writing your emotions down, right? Write your emotions, your needs, and what the conflict is really about. Once you understand yourself and feel more regulated, the next step is to understand the other person, right? Trying to see what they might be feeling. You can even invite them to write it down, their needs as well. And that gives both sides clearly. And finally, when both of you are ready, you move to expression, right? This is where you calmly share your emotions, your needs, and possible solutions without any communication blocker, especially the last one, defensiveness and blame. On the right side of this side, on the right side of this slide, you'll see several sentence starters, right? These aren't just scripts that you need to memorize. These are tools that help you stay clear, calm, and kind, even when emotions rise. And you can adjust them to your own voice, but the goal is always the same: to express instead of react, to understand instead of winning, and to repair instead of avoid. And that's what communication looks like. Okay, and now that we've finished talking about communication blockers, I also want to add something. It's called the non-withstanding clause. So before I get started, I'm not sure if you guys know about this, like the non-withstanding clause, or if you ever heard of it, but I just want you to think about it. So some of you guys might recognize that the term notwithstanding clause is from Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedom, which is allowing the government to override certain rights temporarily for the greater good. But here I'm using it as an emotional literacy context, which is your personal notwithstanding clause. And it is your ability to say, I choose peace over chaos. I choose my well being over constant conflict. And I do not need to keep engaging with people who repeated hurt, drain, or disrespect me. Because the truth is, not everyone deserves access to your emotional space. Not everyone earns the right to your time, your attention, and your energy. Some people process their boundaries over and over again, or they make you feel small, guilty, or exhausted. And when that happens, it is not your job to fix them, to heal them, or to teach them how to treat you. You're allowed to be kind without being available, and you're allowed to care without staying connected. And that's what emotional maturity looks like, right? Recognizing when emotion no longer supports your growth and having the strength to walk away with clarity and grace. And on the other side of the slide, you can see a cartoon character, which is Pushing the cat, right? She never speaks, but her lifestyle actually represents this idea perfectly because she never engaged in drama. She sets a gentle boundary simply by choosing comfort, peace, and simple joys, like naps, snacks, right, quiet time, and minding her own business. This is the energy we want to tap into here, right? Protecting your peace, choosing your emotional well-being, and knowing that when stepping back, it's the healthiest choice that you can make. So when should we actually use the non-withstanding clause? Well, you can use it when someone repeatedly disrespects or ignores your boundaries. It makes you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, or leave you feel drained or anxious, or undervalued after almost every interaction. When these patterns repeat, it's a sign that the relationship is taking more than it's giving. And here's a key point. It's not your responsibility to keep fixing yourself or over-explaining your needs to the people who don't respect you. Think of it this way. You shouldn't keep pouring water into a cracked cup, right? Because no matter how much you pour in, it will never hold. And boundaries are how you protect your energy. If someone keeps draining you or crossing the same line, that's when you activate your non-withstanding clause, right? You quietly step back and protect your peace. But stepping back doesn't mean to be harsh or dramatic. Using your non-withstanding clause does not mean you suddenly turn away, you run, and you shut them out, or say no in a cold way. You can still say no in a kind and respectful way. And you can just stop offering the emotional labor you're already giving many times. And you can say no in a way that shows care, because any reasonable person will understand after a few gentle and honest boundary restrictions. I know this sounds a bit abstract, so let me explain what it looks like in real life. So here are a few simple sentences that you can use to say no without actually saying no or being harsh directly. Because you don't need to make someone the villain in order to walk away, right? You don't have to make a big dramatic ending. You can keep it kind, short, and firm. The goal isn't to hurt them. The goal is to protect your peace, right? Without guilt, without over explaining, and without carrying emotional weight that is yours. Remember, you're responsible for your energy. Learn to invest it where it will grow, not where it gets drained. Sometimes the softest boundary are the strongest one. And before we move on, I want to make something very clear. There's a big difference between using the silent treatment and using your non-withstanding clause. Please don't confuse the two because they're definitely not the same. Silent treatment comes from avoidance, not from strength. And there is a very clear difference between protecting your peace and avoiding confrontation. When you use your notwithstanding clause, you're actually acting from clarity, right? You understand who you are, you understand what your limits are, and you are choosing distance as a healthy, intentional response to protect your emotional well being. And you're not punishing anyone, you're simply respecting yourself. And avoidance, which is silent treatment, on the other hand, comes from fear. It's when you stay silent because you're afraid and scared of conflict. You want to keep peace at any cost, or you don't want someone to be upset with you. But silent doesn't protect you. It only builds pressure inside of you. It pushes the conflict underground, where it turns into resentment, stress, and emotional burnout. So, next time when you feel yourself stepping back from someone, check in with yourself honestly, right? Am I doing this because I'm scared, or am I doing this because I'm respecting myself? Being able to differentiate between the two and use it in the correct situation is what you call emotional maturity. It means you're setting boundaries with clarity, not with punishment. You're choosing your peace, not avoidance. You're acting with intention, not emotion. And that's the difference between shutting someone out and choosing to protect your own well being. So, today we talked about something that affects every relationships that we have, right? How we communicate. We begin by revisiting the Book Cheeks wheel of motion, right? And we reminded ourselves that every feeling, even the most uncomfortable ones, carries a message. When we can recognize what we're actually feeling, whether it's anger, sadness, fear, or disappointment, we gain the power to respond, not react. We then explore the four major communication blockers, which is the habit that quietly hurt our relationships when we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. For each blocker, we practiced sentence starters, right? Simple but practical phrases that helps us express our truth without shutting down, blaming or hurting others. And finally, we introduce something new and powerful, right? It is your notwithstanding clause. This is the reminder that you don't need to engage with everyone, right? To fix every conflict or to carry emotional weight that doesn't belong to you. If a relationship repeatedly crosses your boundaries, drains your energy, or make you feel small, it's okay to step back. You can say no kindly, you can protect your peace without guilt, and sometimes the most emotionally intelligent choice to make is to walk away with clarity and grace. So, before we end today's session, I just want to leave you with a few reminders. Small thoughts that you can take home and return on days when you feel communication or emotions feel a bit heavy. So, first is to love your own company, right? It is one of the strongest form of self-respect. When you feel peace on your own, every relationship you choose becomes intentional, not just something that you rely on, but something you welcome. And second is remember that peace doesn't come from changing the other people. It comes from protecting your boundaries and choosing where your energy goes. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to you. And it's more than okay to step back from a relationship and say that it no longer supports your growth. And finally, real communication start on the inside. When you truly understand yourself and what you're feeling, you express it with honesty, right? You create connection that feels healing instead of draining. These reminders may seem small, right? But you practice them regularly, you will quietly transform how you see yourself and how you show up in every relationships around you. All right, so that's it for today's workshop. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. We really hope that's something you learned today, whether it's about emotional awareness, healthy communication, or protecting your boundaries. I hope that it gave you a new way to understand yourself and your emotions. And before you go, I also want to share something really exciting. So HerPower is building a new emotional literacy curriculum that will be released in early 2026, and it will be completely free and available directly on the HerPower website. And we're creating it so that young people, especially girls, can have a lifelong tools for emotional awareness, communication, and confidence. We'll also be hosting more workshops in the future, both online and in person, covering more topics. So if you want to stay updated, feel free to follow her Power social media account, where all the upcoming events will be announced there. And we've also included HerPower in SheBuildsTheFuture information on the slide in case you want to stay connected, follow our updates, or just learn more about our future workshops. And again, feel free to reach out anytime. We love to hear your thoughts, seeing your growth, and learning how we can continue to improve these sessions for you. And she builds the future team. I think Ishan or Grace, do you have anything that you want to say?
Thank you everyone again for coming today. I hope you all enjoy these sessions, and all of our socials are listed here. So I think for She Builds the Future, we also have some in-person events in Massachusetts. And for online events, we will definitely have some in the future, and we will announce them through our social media accounts. I want to say a huge thank you to HerPower, to Kimberly. I think she is one of the best speakers I've ever had, and I personally really enjoyed these two sessions. I learned so much from you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you as well. Like, I'm really happy that we're able to like collaborate and do this together. I think it's something that's like really meaningful. And yeah, that's it for today's session. Thank you again for your time, like everyone, for spending your evening with us. I hope you have a wonderful night and see you next time. Bye.